The mop hit the concrete floor with a wet slap, spreading crimson across the warehouse space. Sarah Mitchell worked methodically, her movements precise and efficient. She'd done this before, cleaned up after violence, erased evidence of what happened when situations went wrong. But what she didn't know was that someone was watching. Someone who recognized the way she moved, the way she held herself, the faint marks on her forearms that told a story most people would never understand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Riverside Industrial Complex sat on the outskirts of Detroit. A collection of abandoned warehouses that had once churned out auto parts for the Big Three. Now it serves a different purpose entirely. Sarah Mitchell pulled her Honda Civic into the empty lot, the headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness as she checked her phone. 4:47 a.m., right on schedule. She grabbed her cleaning supplies from the trunk: industrial bleach, heavy-duty mops, plastic sheeting, rubber gloves. The same kit she'd used for the past 18 months, working for Precision Cleaning Services. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid cash and asked no questions. That's all Sarah needed these days. The warehouse door was already unlocked when she arrived. Inside, the scene was exactly what she'd expected from Marcus Chun's brief phone call the night before. Blood pooled near the loading dock, splattered across the concrete walls, drag marks leading toward the drain in the center of the floor. Someone had tried to clean up, but amateurs always left evidence behind. Sarah set down her supplies and pulled on her gloves with practiced efficiency. She'd learned long ago that the key to this kind of work was compartmentalization. Don't think about what happened here. Don't wonder who got hurt or why. Just focus on the chemistry, how bleach breaks down hemoglobin, how ammonia neutralizes organic compounds, how proper ventilation prevents toxic gas buildup. She started with the walls, working from top to bottom in systematic sections. The blood had started to coagulate, which made removal trickier. Fresh blood came off easily with cold water and soap. Dried blood required enzymes and patience. Sarah had both. As she worked, her mind wandered to the apartment she'd left 3 hours earlier. Studio space in Corktown, 800 square feet. Murphy bed, kitchenette. Not much, but it was hers. No roommates, no questions. No one asking about the scars on her arms, or why she sometimes woke up screaming. The warehouse echoed with the sound of scrubbing, water dripping, the occasional clang of metal settling. Detroit was waking up. Outside, delivery trucks rumbling past, factory shift changes, the distant hum of the highway. But inside this space, it was just Sarah and the methodical work of making violence disappear. She'd moved to Detroit 8 months ago from Phoenix. Before that, San Antonio. Before that, Jacksonville. Always moving, always staying ahead of the questions that followed her around like shadows. The precision cleaning job had been a godsend. Marcus Chun didn't care about references or background checks. He just needed someone reliable who could handle the messy jobs that regular cleaning crews wouldn't touch. Crime scene cleanup wasn't technically what Precision advertised, but word got around. When businesses needed discretion, when situations got complicated, when the police hadn't been called and wouldn't be called, Marcus got a phone call. And Sarah got sent out with her cleaning kit and her silence. The blood near the loading dock was the worst of it. Someone had bled heavily here, probably from a major artery. Sarah had seen enough trauma to recognize the spray patterns, the way arterial blood arcs differently than venous bleeding. She pushed the thoughts away and focused on the work. Cold water first to prevent the proteins from setting. Then enzyme cleaner to break down the organic matter. Scrub brush for the texture of the concrete. Bleach for sanitization. Mop and rinse. Check for luminol traces under her UV light. Repeat until the surface is clean. It was precise work that required knowledge most people didn't have. Sarah had learned it the hard way, through experience that had nothing to do with cleaning services and everything to do with staying alive in places where bleeding out was a daily possibility. Her phone buzzed against her hip. Text message from Marcus, how's it looking? The client wants to know the timeline. Sarah glanced around the warehouse. She was maybe 40% done. The walls were clean, but the floor would take another 2 hours, plus time for the bleach to work its magic on any traces she'd missed. 3 hours, she texted back. Maybe 4 if they want it perfect. Make it perfect, they're paying extra. Of course they were. The messy jobs always paid extra. Sarah returned to her work, moving with the kind of efficiency that came from muscle memory. She'd developed these skills in places where speed meant survival, where leaving traces behind could get you killed. Not that she thought about those places anymore. Not if she could help it. The sun was starting to rise outside, painting the warehouse windows amber. Sarah worked in the growing light, her movements steady and sure. She'd almost finished the main cleanup area when she heard the sound of footsteps on gravel outside. Sarah froze, listening. Marcus had said the client wouldn't be back until afternoon. The footsteps were measured, deliberate. Not someone trying to sneak around, but not casual either. Professional. The warehouse door opened with a metallic screech. Sarah kept working. Not looking up. Could be building security making rounds. Could be Marcus checking on her progress. Could be the client changing their timeline. But something about the footsteps made her muscles tense in ways she hadn't felt in months. A familiar alertness that had kept her alive in a dozen different countries, a dozen different wars. Ma'am? The voice was male, controlled, with just a hint of southern accent. Sorry to interrupt. I'm looking for the building manager. Sarah glanced up briefly, taking in the man standing near the entrance. Mid-30s, athletic build, close-cropped dark hair. Jeans and a polo shirt that couldn't quite hide the way he carried himself. Military bearing, even in civilian clothes. Not here, Sarah said, returning to her scrubbing. Don't know when he'll be back. That's all right, I can wait. The man didn't leave. Sarah could feel him watching her work, and something about his attention made her skin crawl. Not in a threatening way, exactly. More like recognition. She kept her head down, focusing on a stubborn stain near the drain. But she was aware of every sound he made, every shift in his position. Old habits died hard. You do good work, the man said after a few minutes of silence. Very thorough, very professional. Sarah's hand tightened on the scrub brush. There was something in his tone that made her think he wasn't talking about cleaning anymore. It's just a job, she said. Sure. The man stepped closer, his boots clicking against the concrete. Mind if I ask how long you've been doing this kind of work? Sarah kept scrubbing. Couple years. Must have had good training somewhere. The way you're working that blood stain, you know exactly what you're doing. Most people would just slop bleach everywhere and hope for the best. Now Sarah looked up. The man was standing about 10 feet away, hands relaxed at his sides, but his eyes were sharp and focused. He was studying her with the kind of attention she'd seen before, in briefing rooms and forward operating bases, when operators were sizing each other up. Asterisk, like I said, it's just a job. I'm sure it is. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm Jake Morrison, by the way. Marine Corps, recently separated. Looking at renting some space in the building for a security consulting business. Sarah nodded, but didn't offer her name. She turned back to her work, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. But Jake Morrison stayed right where he was. You know what's interesting? He said, his voice casual but probing. The way you're holding that brush. The way you positioned yourself when I walked in back to the wall. Clear sight lines to the exits. The way you keep checking your 6, even while you're working. Sarah's stomach dropped. She forced herself to keep scrubbing, to maintain the rhythm she'd established. but her heart was beating faster now. Don't know what you're talking about. Maybe not. Jake took another step closer. But I bet money you've done more than clean up blood. I bet you've spilled some too. Sarah's hand stilled on the brush. The warehouse suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. She'd been careful for months, years even. Kept her head down, avoided military towns, stayed away from places where former operators might congregate. But here was Jake Morrison, reading her like an open book. "You're mistaken," she said, but her voice had gone flat, defensive. "Another told me that someone with Morrison's training would pick up immediately." Jake crouched down about 6 feet away, balancing on the balls of his feet with the easy grace of someone who'd spent years in the field. His position was non-threatening, but alert, the kind of stance that could transition to movement in a heartbeat. "Those scars on your forearms," he said quietly. "Third one down, about 2 inches long. That's not from broken glass or a kitchen accident. That's from a kabar blade, probably during close-quarters combat training. The way it healed, clean edges, professional stitching, military medic work." Sarah pulled her sleeves down instinctively. But it was too late. Morrison had seen what he needed to see. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The scar tissue pattern suggests it happened at least 5 years ago," he continued. "Which puts you in service during some interesting times. Afghanistan maybe, Syria? Or somewhere we're not supposed to talk about." "I don't know what game you're playing," Sarah said, standing slowly. She kept the scrub brush in her hand, a makeshift weapon if things went sideways. "But I've got work to finish." "No game." Morrison rose with her, maintaining his distance. "Just professional curiosity. See, I've been out of the corps for 8 months now, and I'm still adjusting to civilian life. When you spend years working with elite operators, you develop an eye for recognizing your own kind." Sarah moved toward her supply bucket, positioning herself so she had multiple escape routes. The loading dock was 20 feet away, the main entrance 40. There was a fire exit near the back wall, but she'd have to get past Morrison to reach it. "Your mistake," she said. "I'm just a cleaner." "Sure you are." Morrison's tone remained conversational, almost friendly. "Just like I'm just a security consultant. But that doesn't change what we used to do, does it?" The warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic. Sarah calculated angles and distances, assessing threats the way she'd been trained. To do in Quantico, in Camp Lejeune, in a dozen forward operating bases where hesitation got you killed. Morrison seemed to sense her mental state. He took a half step back, hands visible, posture relaxed. "Easy," he said. "I'm not here to cause problems. Like I said, just curiosity. It's not often you run into someone with your skill set doing this kind of work. What skill set would that be?" "Crime scene cleanup, for starters. But the way you approach that bloodstain tells me you've seen plenty of the real thing. Combat medicine training, probably advanced. You know exactly how blood behaves when someone's been cut, shot, or blown up. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from YouTube videos." Sarah felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool morning air. Morrison was getting too close to things she'd spent years trying to bury. "The positioning is another tell," he went on. "You never turn your back on an entrance. You work in sectors, clearing each area completely before moving on. You've got situational awareness most civilians couldn't develop in a lifetime. And then there's the way you're standing right now, weight on the balls of your feet, ready to move in any direction. That's not cleaning lady posture. Maybe I'm just paranoid. Maybe. Or maybe you've been in situations where paranoia keeps you breathing." Morrison tilted his head slightly. "What unit?" The question hit like a physical blow. Sarah hadn't heard it in so long, that casual military directness, the assumption of shared experience. For a moment, she almost answered. Almost let herself remember what it felt like to be part of something bigger than herself. I don't know what you're talking about. Force recon? Morrison guessed. Army Rangers? Or something more specialized? The scar pattern and your movement suggests extensive CQB training. Close quarters combat, urban warfare. That narrows it down. Sarah picked up her bleach bottle and moved toward the far wall, putting distance between them. But Morrison's voice followed her. The way you handled that blood near the loading dock. You started with the arterial spray first, worked your way inward to the source. That's not intuitive. Most people work outward from the center. But someone with battlefield medical training knows that arterial bleeding has specific patterns. You read the scene like you've triaged real casualties under fire. Stop. The chemical knowledge is another piece. You're using a 3-stage process: enzyme breakdown, oxidation, then sanitization. That's not standard commercial cleaning protocol. That's the decontamination procedure, the kind they teach for biological hazards in hostile environments. Sarah spun around, the bleach bottle clutched in her hand like a weapon. I said stop. Morrison held up both hands, palms out. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to push so hard. It's just ... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. It's just that I recognize the look in your eyes. The way you carry yourself. I've seen it in the mirror every morning for the past 8 months. What look? Someone trying real hard to forget where they've been and what they've done. The words hung in the air between them. Sarah stared at Morrison, seeing past the civilian clothes to the soldier underneath. The way he held himself, the alertness in his eyes, the careful control in his movements. He wasn't lying about being in the military. And he wasn't lying about recognizing her either. Even if you're right, she said finally, even if I am what you think I am, what difference does it make? That life is over, is it? Morrison asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still fighting wars. Just different ones. He gestured around the warehouse, at the blood she'd been methodically erasing. Someone got hurt here last night, maybe killed. And instead of calling the police, instead of letting the system handle it, someone called your boss. Call you. That tells me this isn't random violence. This is organized crime or corporate espionage or something else that operates outside normal channels. Sarah didn't respond, but she didn't deny it either. The question is, Morrison continued, are you cleaning up after the good guys or the bad guys? There are no good guys, Sarah said quietly. Not anymore. Maybe not. But there are people who deserve justice and people who don't. There are causes worth fighting for, and causes that destroy everything they touch. And you think you can tell the difference? I think we both can. It's why we're having this conversation instead of you trying to kill me right now. Sarah almost smiled at that, almost, because Morrison was right if she'd perceived him as a real threat. If she'd thought he was here to hurt her or expose her, she would have acted by now. The old Sarah, the one who'd operated in places where hesitation meant death, would have put him down the moment he started asking questions, but she hadn't, which meant some part of her trusted him, or wanted to trust him. What do you want? She asked. Honestly, I'm not sure. When I walked in here, I was just looking at office space. But seeing you work, recognizing what you used to be, it got me thinking about what I used to be too. Morrison moved to one of the warehouse windows, looking out at the Detroit skyline in the distance. The morning sun painted the abandoned buildings in shades of gold and rust. You know what the hardest part about getting out is? He said. It's not the nightmares or the guilt or the way civilian life feels like sleepwalking. It's knowledge, the skills, the training, all that capacity for violence and problem solving and thinking 3 moves ahead of everyone else. It doesn't just disappear when you sign your discharge papers. Sarah set down the bleach bottle and leaned against the wall. For the first time since Morrison had walked in, she felt herself relaxing slightly. "Some days I feel like I'm wasting away," he continued. "Like I'm this highly trained weapon sitting in a drawer, getting rusty. All that experience, all that capability, and the most challenging thing I do is file security reports for insurance companies. It's safer that way," Sarah said. "For everyone." "Is it?" "Because while we're playing civilian, while we're pretending, we're just regular people with regular jobs, the world keeps spinning. Bad things keep happening. People keep getting hurt by other people who don't have our moral constraints." He turned back to face her. "Look at this place. Someone bled out here last night, and instead of justice, they got a cleanup crew. Someone with your skills, someone who could probably track down who did this and make them pay, is instead making the evidence disappear. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Tell me you haven't wondered who died here. Tell me you haven't thought about what they did to deserve it, whether their family will ever know what happened to them. Tell me you've never wanted to do more than just clean up the mess." Sarah closed her eyes. Because Morrison was hitting too close to home, touching thoughts she'd been pushing down for months. Every crime scene she cleaned, every trace of violence she erased. She wondered about the story behind it. Who was the victim? Who was the perpetrator? Was this justice or murder? "It's not my job to care," she said. "Maybe not. But caring anyway is what separates us from the people who create these messes in the first place." Morrison checked his watch and moved toward the entrance. "I should let you get back to work. Your boss is probably expecting an update soon." He paused at the door, hand on the frame. "I meant what I said about the office space. I really am starting a security consulting business. If you ever decide you want to do more than clean up after violence, give me a call." He pulled a business card from his wallet and set it on a nearby crate. The card was simple, just his name, phone number, and the words Morrison Security Solutions. "Think about it," he said. "We both know you're wasted doing this kind of work, and the world could use more people like us on the right side of things." After Morrison left, Sarah stood alone in the warehouse, staring at the business card. The bloodstains were almost gone now, reduced to faint shadows that would disappear completely once the bleach finished its work. In a few hours there would be no trace of whatever violence had occurred here, but Morrison's words lingered in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Questions she'd been avoiding, possibilities she'd been denying, a future she'd convinced herself was impossible. She picked up the card and slipped it into her pocket. Then she returned to her work, methodically erasing the last evidence of violence from the warehouse floor. But for the first time in months, her mind wasn't just focused on the chemistry of cleanup. She was thinking about what came next. 3 days passed before Sarah pulled Morrison's card from her jacket pocket. She'd finished the warehouse job, collected her payment from Marcus Chun, and taken on 2 more assignments, a restaurant kitchen where a disagreement between business partners had gotten bloody, and an office building where corporate espionage had turned violent. Standard work for precision cleaning services, but Morrison's words echoed in her head during each job. The questions he'd asked, the recognition in his eyes, the suggestion that she was wasting her skills on cleanup duty. She found herself analyzing crime scenes differently now, not just as stains to be removed, but as stories to be understood. The restaurant kitchen told a tale of desperation. Blood spatter consistent with defensive wounds, overturned furniture suggesting a struggle, a safe that had been hastily emptied. Someone had been cornered, fought back and lost. The office building was more calculated. Minimal blood, confined to a single desk area, no signs of struggle. Professional work, probably a silenced weapon, victim caught by surprise. The kind of assassination that spoke to larger organizations, deeper conspiracies. Sarah had cleaned both scenes with her usual efficiency, but for the first time in months, she'd found herself wondering about justice. about whether the people who died deserved what happened to them, whether their killers would face consequences, whether erasing the evidence made her complicit in covering up murder. Now she sat in her studio apartment, Morrison's card balanced on her fingertips, wrestling with choices she'd thought she'd already made. The card was simple, professional, giving nothing away about the man behind it. But she remembered his eyes, alert, intelligent, carrying the same weight she saw in her own mirror each morning. Her laptop was open on the small kitchen table, cursor blinking in the search bar. She'd been debating whether to look him up for the past hour. Standard operational security said no researching contacts was how you left digital footprints, how you exposed yourself to surveillance. But curiosity and something deeper, something like hope, urged her forward. She typed his name and hit enter. The results were surprisingly sparse. A few social media profiles that looked abandoned, some business registration documents for Morrison. Security Solutions, a mention in a local veterans newsletter about small business startups. Either Morrison was very careful about his online presence, or his military service had been classified enough to scrub most records. Sarah dug deeper, using search techniques she'd learned in intelligence training, cross-referencing databases, following indirect connections, looking for patterns in the absence of information. What she found made her sit back in her chair. Jake Morrison had been force reconnaissance, just as he'd guessed about her background. But his service record was heavily redacted, with deployment locations listed as classified and unit assignments showing only administrative codes. The few details that slipped through suggested extensive overseas operations, multiple combat tours, specialized training that went beyond standard Marine Corps curriculum. More interesting was what happened after his discharge. The business registration for Morrison Security Solutions was only 6 months old, but it was structured as a limited liability company with multiple subsidiaries and shell corporations. Complex financial arrangements that suggested either serious startup capital or clients who valued extreme discretion. A phone number trace revealed that Morrison's business line routed through 3 different forwarding services before reaching an answering system. His office address was a virtual mailbox in a corporate center downtown. Professional tradecraft that spoke to ongoing security concerns. Sarah closed the laptop and walked to her apartment window. Detroit sprawled below her, a city rebuilding itself from decades of decline. Empty lots where houses used to stand, new construction rising between abandoned buildings, the constant tension between decay and renewal. She'd chosen Detroit specifically because it was a city where people minded their own business, where someone could disappear into the urban landscape without attracting attention. But maybe Morrison was right. Maybe disappearing wasn't the same as living. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Chun. Got something urgent. Big cleanup. Higher pay than usual. Are you available tonight? Sarah stared at the message, then at Morrison's card. A choice point, she realized. Take another cleanup job and continue the pattern she'd established, or finally make the call that might change everything. She picked up her phone and dialed Morrison's number. Morrison Security Solutions, came the answer after 3 rings. Professional, neutral, giving nothing away. It's Sarah, from the warehouse. A pause. Then, I wondered if you'd call. I've been thinking about what you said, about wasted potential. And, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm tired of just cleaning up after violence instead of preventing it. That's a start. Are you free for coffee? When? Now if you want. There's a diner on Corktown Avenue, near the old train station. Quiet booths, good sight lines, multiple exits. Sarah almost smiled. Trust Morrison to pick a location based on tactical considerations. 20 minutes, she said. The diner was exactly what Morrison had promised, a local institution with worn vinyl booths, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of clientele that minded their own business. Sarah arrived first, claiming a corner booth that let her watch both the entrance and the kitchen. Old habits. Morrison appeared exactly on time, scanning the room briefly before approaching her table. He'd traded his polo shirt for a black sweater and tactical pants, looking more like his military background. "Thanks for calling," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either." A waitress appeared with coffee and menus. Both Sarah and Morrison ordered automatically black coffee, no food keeping their attention on each other and the room around them. "So," Morrison said once they were alone again, "what changed your mind?" "The jobs I've been doing since we talked. Every crime scene tells a story, and I'm starting to wonder if I'm on the right side of those stories." "What kind of stories?" Sarah described the restaurant kitchen and office building, keeping details vague but conveying the patterns she'd observed. Morrison listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious. "Professional hits," he said when she finished. "The office building anyway. The restaurant sounds more personal." "That's what I thought too. Which means I'm not just cleaning up random violence. I'm erasing evidence of organized criminal activity. How does that sit with you?" Sarah sipped her coffee, considering the question. "It bothers me more than it used to. Time was. I could tell myself it wasn't my responsibility. Not my mission, not my problem. But lately you're remembering why you joined the military in the first place." She looked up sharply. "What makes you say that?" "Because I'm going through the same thing. We didn't sign up to serve our country just for the paycheck or the adventure. We believed in something. Justice, protection, making a difference. Those beliefs don't just disappear because you change clothes." Morrison leaned forward, his voice dropping. "The question is, what do we do about it? We can't go back to our old units, our old missions. But we can't pretend to be civilians either. Not really. So what's the middle ground? Your security consulting business?" "Partly, but it's more than that. I've been thinking about a different kind of operation. Private sector, but with military discipline and moral standards. Taking on jobs that law enforcement can't handle or won't touch." Sarah felt a familiar stirring in her chest, the same feeling she'd had during her first deployment briefing, when she'd realized she was about to do work that mattered. "What kind of jobs?" "Missing persons cases where the trail goes cold, corporate corruption that threatens public safety, human trafficking operations that slip through jurisdictional cracks, the kind of problems that require specialized skills and flexible operating parameters." "You mean vigilante work?" "I mean justice work. There's a difference." Morrison pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. Local headline: "Third teenager missing from East Side. Police baffled." 3 girls, ages 15 to 17, disappeared over the past 6 months. All from the same neighborhood. All with similar backgrounds, runaways, addicts, kids the system had already failed. Police investigated each disappearance separately, found no connections, and filed them as voluntary missing persons. Sarah read the article quickly, her mind already processing patterns and possibilities. "But you see connections." "I see a hunting ground. Someone's targeting vulnerable kids because they know nobody will look too hard when they disappear. It's a perfect victim pool for trafficking operations. The police are understaffed and overwhelmed. Detroit PD is still rebuilding after years of budget cuts. They don't have the resources for extended investigations, especially not for kids who fit the runaway profile." Morrison put his phone away and met Sarah's eyes. "But we do. We have the training, the skills, and the motivation to dig deeper, to follow leads that official channels can't or won't pursue." Sarah felt her pulse quickening. For the first time in months, she was thinking tactically, strategically, the way she'd been trained to approach complex problems with incomplete information. "You're talking about starting a private investigation firm." "I'm talking about starting something that doesn't have a name yet. Something between private investigation and specialized military operations. We take on cases that matter, cases that require our particular skill sets, and we operate with the kind of freedom that government agencies don't have. Freedom to do what, exactly? Morrison's expression grew serious. To follow evidence wherever it leads, to use enhanced interrogation techniques when necessary, to operate outside normal jurisdictional boundaries, to take direct action against threats that legal channels can't touch. Sarah understood what he wasn't saying directly. They would be operating in gray areas where traditional law enforcement couldn't go, using methods that wouldn't stand up in court but might save lives. It's dangerous, she said. Everything worthwhile is dangerous. The question is whether the risk is worth the potential outcome. Sarah thought about the teenagers in the news article, imagined them scared and trapped somewhere in Detroit's urban maze. Then she thought about the blood she'd cleaned up over the past months, the violence she'd helped cover up, the justice that had been denied. What would you need from me? Your skills, your training, your commitment to something bigger than just survival. Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. I've been working on the missing teenagers case on my own time for the past 3 weeks. Following leads, building a profile, mapping connections the police missed. He slid the folder across the table. Take a look. Tell me what you think. Sarah opened the folder and found herself looking at crime scene photos, police reports, witness statements, and Morrison's own investigative notes. The material was organized with military precision, every detail cataloged and cross-referenced. As she read, the pieces began falling into place. The 3 missing girls had all been seen talking to older men in the weeks before they disappeared. Similar descriptions, well-dressed, middle-aged, driving expensive cars. They'd been recruiting at bus stations, homeless shelters, anywhere desperate kids congregated. The police had noted these connections, but hadn't followed up aggressively. Too many other cases, too few detectives, too little public pressure to investigate missing runaways. But Morrison had dug deeper. He'd identified a pattern of similar disappearances in other cities, tracked financial records that suggested organized criminal enterprise, found links to escort services and massage parlors that operated on the margins of legitimacy. This is trafficking, Sarah said, looking up from the files. High-end trafficking. They're not just selling street prostitution. They're providing specialized services to wealthy clients who pay premium prices for young, vulnerable girls. Sarah felt something dark and familiar stirring in her chest, the cold anger that had sustained her through 3 tours of combat, the determination that had driven her to volunteer for the most dangerous assignments. What's your plan? Morrison smiled for the first time since she'd known him. Now you're asking the right questions. Morrison's plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. They would infiltrate the trafficking network from multiple angles, Sarah going undercover as a potential victim to identify recruitment methods and locations, while Morrison used his security consulting business as cover to investigate the financial and logistical infrastructure. The key is patience, Morrison explained, spreading surveillance photos across the diner table. These operations are built on trust networks and careful vetting. One wrong move, one suspicious question, and the whole thing disappears underground. For months, Sarah studied the images, grainy shots of well-dressed men talking to teenage girls outside bus stations, homeless shelters, fast food restaurants. The predators all shared certain characteristics: middle-aged, expensive clothes, luxury vehicles, the kind of surface respectability that made young victims feel safe. How long have you been watching them? 3 weeks of active surveillance. But I've been building the profile for 2 months, ever since the second girl disappeared. Morrison pointed to one of the photos. This guy's the primary recruiter. Richard Volkov, goes by Rick, Russian immigrant, clean criminal record, owns A chain of import businesses that probably serve as money laundering fronts. Sarah examined Volkov's photo, a man in his 50s with silver hair and careful grooming. The kind of person who could walk into any upscale establishment without raising eyebrows. But there was something in his eyes that she recognized. A cold calculation she'd seen in war-zone profiteers and mercenaries. What's his approach? Classic grooming tactics. Identifies girls who are desperate homeless, addicted, aging out of foster care. Offers them legitimate-sounding opportunities. Modeling contracts, waitressing jobs at high-end establishments. Escort work that he claims is just companionship for business dinners. Morrison pulled up another photo on his phone. This one showing Volkov talking to a girl who couldn't have been older than 16. The girl's body language was defensive but interested, the posture of someone who wanted to believe in rescue. Once he hooks them, the story changes gradually. The modeling job requires them to live in company housing for security. The escort work involves increasingly intimate contact with clients. By the time they realize what's happening, they're already trapped. Sarah felt her jaw clenching. She'd encountered human traffickers during overseas operations, usually as secondary targets in larger counter-terrorism missions. But those have been distant, clinical encounters, enemy combatants to be eliminated or captured, not rescued victims. To be saved. What about law enforcement? Surely someone's investigating this. Detective Lisa Rodriguez in Missing Persons is working the case, but she's fighting an uphill battle. No physical evidence, no witnesses willing to talk, no jurisdiction for interstate trafficking charges. She's good, but she's operating within a system that's designed to move slowly and follow established procedures. Morrison showed her another file, Rodriguez's case notes, somehow acquired through channels Sarah didn't want to think about too carefully. She's identified some of the same patterns I have, but she doesn't have the resources to pursue them aggressively. Too many other cases, too little departmental support, too many bureaucratic barriers to effective investigation. Sarah closed the file and leaned back in the booth. So we're going to do what she can't. We're going to do what needs to be done. The question is whether you're ready for what that might involve. Sarah met Morrison's gaze directly. What exactly are you asking me to do? Go undercover as a potential victim. Get recruited into the network. Identify key players and locations. Gather evidence that can lead us to the missing girls. And then, Morrison's expression hardened. Then we extract the victims and eliminate the threat. Permanently, if necessary. The word eliminate hung in the air between them, carrying implications they both understood. They weren't talking about citizens' arrests or evidence gathering for police prosecution. They were talking about direct action, the kind of mission. Parameters they'd operated under in foreign theaters where American law didn't apply. That's assassination, Sarah said quietly. That's justice. These people are predators who destroy young lives for profit. The legal system has proven inadequate to stop them, so we stop them ourselves. Sarah thought about the 3 missing teenagers, imagining them trapped somewhere in Detroit's underground economy, selling their bodies to pay off debts that would never decrease, living in fear of violence that could come at any moment. Then, she thought about the oath she'd taken when she joined the Marine Corps, the promise to defend the innocent against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Morrison smiled grimly. Volkov is actively recruiting right now. I've tracked him to 3 locations where he makes regular contact with potential victims. The fastest way to get inside the network is to put you in his path and let him approach you naturally. How do I make myself an attractive target? That's the hard part. You're too old to fit the usual profile, and your body language screams military training. We'll need to create a believable backstory that explains why you're vulnerable, despite your age and obvious capabilities. Morrison pulled out a notebook and began sketching operational parameters. I'm thinking about recent drug addiction, maybe military discharge for substance abuse. You're new to Detroit, burned through your support systems. Desperate enough to consider questionable opportunities. Sarah nodded, her mind already shifting into operational mode. I'll need documentation to support the cover story. Medical records, discharge papers, financial history showing recent problems. I can handle the paperwork. I've got contacts who specialize in that kind of thing. What about backup? If things go wrong during the infiltration, how do I get out? Morrison's expression grew serious. I'll maintain overwatch at all times. Electronic surveillance, physical positioning, emergency extraction protocols. But Sarah, you need to understand, once you're inside that network, you'll be on your own for extended periods. No wire, no panic button, no immediate rescue option. Sarah absorbed this information without flinching. She'd operated alone behind enemy lines before and had spent weeks maintaining deep cover in hostile territory. But this felt different somehow, more personal. How long before we can move? Documentation will take 48 hours. Surveillance and positioning, another 24. Call it 3 days total before you make first contact with Volkov. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled to Marcus Chun's text about the urgent cleaning job. I need to handle my current employer first. Can't just disappear without explanation. What are you going to tell him? Family emergency. Death in the family. Need to travel out of state for funeral arrangements. Should buy me at least 2 weeks. Before he starts asking questions. Morrison nodded approvingly. Good operational security. Clean break from your current life without burning bridges unnecessarily. They spent the next hour going over details, cover story refinement, communication, protocols, contingency planning. Morrison produced maps of Detroit showing Volkov's known operating areas, photographs of his associates, and financial records that revealed the scope of the trafficking network. The organization was larger than Sarah had initially realized. At least a dozen men were involved in recruitment and transportation, multiple properties serving as safe houses and operation centers, financial flows that suggested monthly revenues in the hundreds of thousands. This isn't just local trafficking, she observed, studying the money trail. This connects to national and international networks. Exactly. Which means taking down Volkov and his immediate associates won't solve the larger problem. But it will save the girls who are currently trapped, and it will disrupt operations long enough for other agencies to potentially move in, Morrison gathered. Up the files and photographs, preparing to leave. There's something else you should know. Detective Rodriguez has been getting close to some of the same information we have. If we move too slowly, she might stumble into the operation and compromise everything. Or get herself killed, that too. These people have been killed to protect their operation before. They won't hesitate to eliminate a police detective who gets too close. Sarah felt the familiar weight of operational responsibility settling on her shoulders. Multiple lives at stake, time pressure, incomplete information, high probability of violence. The kind of mission parameters that had defined her military career. When do we start? Morrison stood and dropped money on the table. For their coffee. Documentation meeting tomorrow at noon. I'll text you the address. Come alone, no surveillance, cash only. He paused at the edge of the booth. Sarah, once we start this, there's no going back. We'll be operating outside legal authority, using methods that could land us in prison if we're caught. Are you sure you're ready for that? Sarah thought about the blood she'd been cleaning up for months, the violence she'd helped conceal, the justice that had been denied. Then she thought about 3 teenage girls who were counting on someone to care enough to find them. I'm ready. After Morrison left, Sarah sat alone in the diner for another 20 minutes, processing the magnitude of what she'd just committed to. She was about to become a vigilante, operating without legal authority or institutional backing, relying entirely on skills she'd hoped never to use again. Her phone buzzed with another text from Marcus Chun. Still need an answer about tonight's job. Big money, but it has to be done by morning. Sarah stared at the message, then typed back, can't do it. Family emergency, need to leave town immediately. Will call when I'm back. She hit send and immediately turned off her phone. The first bridge burned, the first step toward a new kind of war. Outside the diner window, Detroit continued its slow process of renewal and decay, a city where people minded their own business and asked few questions. The perfect place to disappear, Morrison had said. But also, Sarah realized, the perfect place to become someone new, someone who fought back against the darkness instead of just cleaning up after it. She walked to her car through the gathering dusk, her mind already shifting into mission planning mode. 3 days to prepare, then infiltration into a criminal network that destroyed young lives for profit. The kind of operation that had no room for hesitation or moral ambiguity. Sarah Mitchell, former Marine Force reconnaissance operator, was going back to war. This time, the battlefield was the streets of Detroit, and the enemy was the predators who hunted the city's most vulnerable residents. As she drove through the urban maze toward her apartment, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. Tomorrow she will begin preparing for the most dangerous mission of her life. Tonight, she would remember what it felt like to be a warrior again. The document forger worked out of a basement in Hamtramck, surrounded by printers, scanners, and computers that hummed with a legal purpose. Tommy Nguyen had been creating false identities for 20 years, serving everyone from undocumented immigrants seeking legitimate work to criminals needing clean backgrounds. Morrison had found him through networks that existed in the shadows between legal and illegal Detroit. Medical discharge for substance abuse, Tommy said, examining the specifications Morrison had provided. Honorable discharge downgraded to general under other than honorable conditions. Treatment records showing opioid addiction following combat injury. Sarah sat in an uncomfortable folding chair, watching Tommy work with the focused intensity of a master craftsman. The man was in his 60s, graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, thick glasses that magnified his eyes as he studied computer screens filled with official forms and databases. The trick, Tommy continued, is making the documentation slightly imperfect. Real military records have small inconsistencies, bureaucratic errors, conflicting information between different systems. Perfect documents actually look suspicious. He pulled up Sarah's legitimate service record on one screen, while building her false discharge documentation on another. Your real record shows exemplary service, multiple commendations, and a clean disciplinary history. We need to create a credible downward spiral without contradicting verifiable facts. Sarah watched her military career being systematically rewritten. Combat injury in Afghanistan became the trigger for prescription drug dependency. Exemplary performance reviews were followed by declining evaluations, citing reliability issues and insubordination. Commendations for bravery were overshadowed by disciplinary actions for unauthorized absence and failure to report for duty. The beauty of the opioid crisis, Tommy said with clinical detachment, is that it provides perfect cover for personality changes and professional decline. Addiction explains everything. Why a decorated Marine might become homeless, why someone with your training would be desperate enough to consider questionable employment. Morrison leaned over Tommy's shoulder, examining the fabricated medical records. What about withdrawal symptoms? Physical signs that Volkov might look for? That's where this gets interesting, Tommy replied. He pulled up photographs of track marks, injection sites, and the physical deterioration that accompanied long-term drug use. Sarah's too healthy looking for active addiction, but we can simulate recent recovery. Methadone maintenance, outpatient treatment, the kind of controlled rehabilitation that leaves someone functional but financially desperate. Sarah felt an odd disconnection watching her fictional addiction take shape on computer screens. Tommy created treatment records showing her cycling through VA hospitals, civilian rehabilitation centers, halfway houses that kicked her out for policy violations. A paper trail of self-destruction that would explain why someone with her capabilities might be vulnerable to trafficking recruitment. Financial records are crucial, Tommy explained, opening banking software that displayed fabricated transaction histories. We need to show gradual decline from stable military income to complete financial collapse. Medical bills from addiction, treatment, unpaid rent leading to eviction, credit cards maxed out buying drugs, or trying to maintain basic living expenses. The false financial history was devastating to review. Sarah watched her fictional self liquidating retirement accounts to pay for drugs, borrowing money from family members who eventually cut off contact, taking increasingly desperate jobs to survive. The progression felt horribly realistic. "How long does this usually take?" Morrison asked. "Another 6 hours for complete documentation. But there's something else you should consider." Tommy turned away from his computers, fixing both of them with a serious stare. "The people you're planning to infiltrate, they don't just rely on paperwork. They do background checks, verify stories through human contacts, sometimes even conduct surveillance before recruitment." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. What kind of verification? They'll call treatment centers, talk to counselors, maybe even contact family members if they can identify them. Professional traffickers are paranoid about law enforcement infiltration. They've developed sophisticated counterintelligence procedures. Morrison frowned. "Can you create supporting evidence for human verification?" "To some extent. I have contacts at several treatment facilities who will confirm patient records for the right price. But family contacts are trickier. You'll need someone willing to play a role if they call checking references." Sarah thought about her real family parents in Oregon who believed she was working private security, a brother in Texas who hadn't spoken to her in 2 years following an argument about her military service. None of them would be willing or able to support an undercover operation. "I can handle family contacts," Morrison said. "I've got people who can play concerned relatives, former friends, treatment counselors." But Sarah needs to be prepared for detailed questioning about her addiction history. Tommy nodded and pulled up medical websites showing symptoms, treatment protocols, rehabilitation timelines. Opioid addiction has specific patterns. Physical symptoms, psychological effects, behavioral changes that develop over predictable time frames. You'll need to memorize enough detail to convince someone who's seen real addicts. For the next 3 hours, Sarah studied her fictional addiction like a military briefing. She learned about withdrawal symptoms, nausea, muscle aches, anxiety, insomnia. She memorized the names of pain medications that led to heroin use, understood the progression from prescription pills to street drugs to injection use. She studied the psychological aspects, the desperation, the lying, the gradual destruction of relationships and career prospects. The hardest part was internalizing the mindset. Sarah had never been addicted to anything stronger than caffeine, had maintained strict physical and mental discipline throughout her military career. Now she needed to convincingly portray someone who had lost control completely, someone desperate enough to trust strangers offering dubious opportunities. "Emotional authenticity is crucial," Tommy explained while printing final documents. "Addicts in recovery carry specific kinds of shame and vulnerability. Hope mixed with self-doubt, gratitude for help but resentment at needing it. You can't fake that kind of complexity without understanding the underlying psychology." Morrison studied Sarah's expression. "Are you comfortable with this level of deception?" "I've maintained cover identities before. Different circumstances, but the principles are the same. Military cover operations are different from criminal infiltration. In combat zones, you're usually pretending to be someone stronger or more capable than you actually are. This requires you to portray weakness, desperation, emotional damage. That's psychologically harder to sustain. Sarah considered this distinction. Morrison was right, her previous undercover work had involved posing as arms dealers, intelligence operatives, people with power and resources. Playing a victim would require a different kind of performance, one that might be more emotionally costly. I can handle it. Tommy finished printing the documentation and organized everything into a manila envelope. Birth certificate, social security card, military discharge papers, medical records, bank statements, treatment center certificates, parole officer contact information. A complete identity for someone whose life had fallen apart. One last thing, Tommy said, handing Sarah a small plastic bag containing prescription bottles. Empty containers from legitimate medications used in addiction treatment. Methadone, Suboxone, anxiety medications typically prescribed during recovery. Keep these with you. They're props that add credibility to your cover story. Sarah examined the pill bottles, noting the authentic-looking prescription labels with her false name and fabricated medical information. Even the pharmacy names and addresses were real, though the prescriptions themselves had been generated entirely through Tommy's computer systems. What about digital footprints? Morrison asked. Social media presence, online activity, the kind of background information that people check these days, already handled. Tommy showed them a laptop displaying Facebook and Instagram profiles. For Sarah's false identity, the accounts showed a gradual decline from military service photos to increasingly erratic posts about financial struggles, relationship problems, and health issues. The timeline corresponded perfectly with her fabricated addiction history. The genius is in the details, Tommy explained, scrolling through fake social media posts. Comments from fake friends expressing concern, check-ins at real treatment facilities, posts about job searching that become increasingly desperate over time. It creates a narrative that supports everything in the official documentation. Sarah studied her fictional online presence, noting how Tommy had crafted posts that revealed personal information gradually. Military service mentioned casually in early posts, financial problems hinted at through complaints about medical bills, addiction struggles revealed through requests for help and treatment center check-ins. How long will this hold up under investigation? Against basic background checks, indefinitely. Against serious law enforcement investigation with subpoena power, maybe a few weeks before inconsistencies emerge. But trafficking organizations typically don't have those kinds of resources. Morrison paid Tommy in cash $5,000 for complete documentation and ongoing support services. They agreed on communication protocols if additional verification was needed during the operation. As they prepared to leave, Tommy offered one final piece of advice. Remember that infiltrating criminal organizations is like method acting. You need to become the character completely, not just pretend to be them. The people you're targeting are experts at reading human behavior. Any inconsistency in your performance could be fatal. Sarah nodded, already beginning the mental process of becoming someone else. She studied her reflection in Tommy's basement mirror, seeing not a former Marine Force reconnaissance operator, but a recovering addict desperate for opportunities. That might help her rebuild a destroyed life. The transformation would need to be complete posture, speech patterns, emotional responses, unconscious habits. She would need to carry herself like someone who had been broken and was slowly healing. Someone grateful for any chance at legitimate work, but naive about the true nature of the opportunities being offered. Outside Tommy's basement, Detroit's afternoon light seemed harsher than before. Sarah climbed into Morrison's truck, her new identity documents secure in the manila envelope, her mind already shifting into the psychology of vulnerability and desperation. Tomorrow we do final surveillance of Volkov's recruitment locations, Morrison said as they drove through Hamtramck's industrial landscape. After that, You'll be on your own until the extraction." Sarah nodded, studying the prescription bottles that would serve as props in her performance. Empty containers that represented real addiction, real suffering, real lives destroyed by the predators they were preparing to hunt in 48 hours. She would walk into a homeless shelter on Detroit's east side, carrying herself like someone who had lost everything and was willing to consider any opportunity for survival. She would make herself a target for Richard Volkov's recruitment operation, trusting that Morrison would maintain overwatch while she disappeared into a criminal network that destroyed young lives for profit. The mission was about to begin, and Sarah Mitchell was about to become someone else entirely. The Safe Haven shelter on Gratiot Avenue served Detroit's most desperate residents, addicts, ex-convicts, people who had fallen through every other social safety net. Sarah stood across the street at 6:30 a.m., watching the morning routine through wire-reinforced windows. Residents lined up for breakfast, their movements slow and careful, the posture of people who had learned not to attract attention. She'd been observing for 3 days now, memorizing patterns, identifying the staff members who worked different shifts, noting which residents seemed to be regular fixtures and which were transient. Morrison's surveillance had confirmed that Volkov visited the shelter twice weekly, usually on Tuesday and Friday mornings, posing as a volunteer coordinator from a job placement agency. Today was Friday. Sarah adjusted the strap of her worn backpack and crossed the street. Inside the pack were her new identity documents, the empty prescription bottles, and $47 in crumpled bills, everything a recovering addict might carry while seeking temporary shelter. She'd spent the previous evening distressing her clothes, practicing the slightly unsteady walk of someone still adjusting to sobriety, rehearsing the story she would tell if questioned. The shelter's entrance smelled of industrial disinfectant, mixed with unwashed bodies and desperation. A security guard barely looked up as Sarah approached the intake desk, where a tired-looking woman with kind eyes was processing the morning's new arrivals. "First time here?" the intake worker asked, not unkindly. "Yeah, just got into town yesterday." Sarah's voice carried a slight tremor that she'd practiced, not enough to suggest active addiction, but enough to indicate recent trauma and ongoing anxiety. "Someone at the bus station said you might have space. We might name?" "Jessica Torres." Sarah handed over her fabricated identification, watching as the worker copied information onto intake forms. The false documents passed their first real-world test without question. "Any medical conditions, medications, substance abuse issues?" "I'm in recovery, opioids, been clean for 4 months." Sarah pulled out one of Tommy's prescription bottles, shaking it slightly so the worker could hear it was empty. "I'm still taking Suboxone, but I'm down to a really low dose." The worker nodded with professional sympathy. She'd clearly heard similar stories hundreds of times before. "We have support group meetings twice weekly. Not required, but recommended. Breakfast is served until 8, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Curfew is 10 p.m., lights out at 11. Sarah received a temporary bed assignment and a list of shelter rules. As she walked toward the dormitory area, she noticed a man in expensive suit talking quietly with the shelter director near the administrative offices. Richard Volkov, exactly as Morrison's surveillance photos had depicted him. Volkov was younger looking. In person, maybe late 40s rather than 50s, with silver at his temples and the kind of grooming that suggested significant disposable income. He carried himself with confidence, but not arrogance, the demeanor of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted through charm rather than intimidation. Sarah claimed her assigned bunk and began the careful process of integration. She ate breakfast quietly, observing conversations around her, noting which residents seemed to be shelter regulars and which were clearly new arrivals like herself. The social dynamics were complex informal hierarchies based on length of stay, unspoken alliances between people who shared similar backgrounds, careful distances maintained by those who preferred isolation. During the morning hours, she volunteered to help with cleaning duties, gaining access to different areas of the shelter, while demonstrating the kind of grateful compliance that staff members appreciated. She listened to conversations, picked up details about other residents' situations, and began constructing a mental map of the social environment she would need to navigate. Volkov appeared in the common area around 10 a.m., carrying a clipboard and wearing a volunteer badge that identified him as representing Motor City Employment Solutions. Sarah watched from across the room as he approached individual residents, engaging them in friendly conversation that seemed focused on their employment history and current circumstances. His technique was masterful. Volkov presented himself as genuinely concerned about helping people rebuild their lives, asking about job skills, education backgrounds, what kind of work they hope to find. He listened with apparent empathy, took notes on his clipboard, promised to check with employers who might have appropriate opportunities. Sarah positioned herself within earshot when Volkov approached a young woman named Crystal, a 19-year-old, who'd been at the shelter for 2 weeks after aging out of foster care. Administrative assistant work sounds perfect for someone with your background, Volkov was saying, his voice warm and encouraging. I know several businesses that specifically hire people who are rebuilding their lives. They understand that everyone deserves a second chance. Crystal's face lit up with hope. Really? I mean, I don't have much experience, but I'm a really hard worker. Experience can be taught. Characters can't. And you clearly have good character. Volkov made a note on his clipboard. The position I'm thinking of includes housing assistance furnished, apartment, utilities paid, transportation provided. The employer understands that stable housing is crucial for employment success. Sarah felt her jaw clench as she watched Crystal's desperate gratitude. The girl was exactly the kind of vulnerable target that trafficking operations sought: young, isolated, eager to believe in opportunities that seemed too good to be true. When could I start? Crystal asked. Well, there's a brief interview process. Just a formality, really. And the employer likes to meet potential employees in a comfortable setting, usually over dinner at a nice restaurant. Shows they're serious about treating workers well. Sarah recognized the grooming technique, creating a sense of exclusivity and special treatment, making the victim feel chosen rather than hunted. Crystal was already imagining herself in professional clothes, working in a real office, finally escaping the cycle of poverty and instability that had defined her life. Volkov handed Crystal a business card. Call this number tomorrow afternoon. Ask for Elena. She handles scheduling for the interviews. And Crystal? This stays between us for now. The employer values discretion, and there are limited positions available. After Volkov left, Sarah watched Crystal studying the business card like it was a lottery ticket. Other residents noticed her excitement and asked questions, but Crystal followed Volkov's advice about discretion, saying only that she might have found job opportunities. Sarah spent the rest of the day integrating further into shelter life, participating in the afternoon support group meeting, helping with dinner preparation, gradually building the social connections that would make her seem like a legitimate resident rather than an infiltrator. The support group was particularly challenging. Sitting in a circle with 12 other recovering addicts, listening to stories of genuine trauma and loss, Sarah felt the weight of her deception. These were real people sharing real pain, while she performed fictional suffering for operational purposes. I lost everything, said Maria, a woman in her 30s with track marks still visible on her arms. My kids, my apartment, my job, everything. But being here, having a chance to start over, it's the first hope I've had in years. Others shared similar stories: family relationships destroyed by addiction, careers derailed by substance abuse, health problems that would never fully heal. Sarah listened with growing discomfort, realizing that her fictional backstory was built on the genuine suffering of people like those around her. When the group leader asked if she wanted to share, Sarah kept her contribution brief. I'm Jessica. 4 months clean. Still figuring out how to rebuild, but grateful for programs like this that give people a chance. The group responded with supportive murmurs and nods. These people understood the struggle she was pretending to experience, recognized the vulnerability she was performing as authentic. After dinner, Sarah positioned herself in the common area, where residents typically gathered to watch television or play cards. She needed to establish herself as someone worth Volkov's attention, not so desperate as to seem unstable, but vulnerable enough to be a potential target. She struck up conversations with other residents, carefully revealing details about her fabricated background. Former military service that ended badly due to addiction. No family support after burning too many bridges. Skills that could be valuable in legitimate employment, but no recent work history. Financial desperation masked by stubborn pride. Crystal approached her during the evening hours, still glowing with excitement about her potential job opportunity. You seem like you've got it together, Crystal said, settling onto the couch beside Sarah. Like you know how to handle yourself. I was thinking ... Maybe you could give me some advice? Sarah felt a chill of recognition. This was how recruitment networks expanded through referrals between victims, recommendations from people who seemed trustworthy. Crystal wasn't just being groomed for trafficking. She was being positioned to help recruit others. What kind of advice? Well, there's this guy who comes here sometimes, helps people find jobs. Really good jobs with housing and everything. He talked to me today about an opportunity, but... Crystal hesitated. I mean, it sounds amazing, but you know how things that sound too good to be true usually are. Sarah chose her words carefully. What kind of job? Administrative work. Office environment, professional clothes, furnished apartment included. The employer even wants to take me to dinner before hiring, like a real interview at a nice restaurant. Sounds legitimate, Sarah said, while internally screaming warnings. What's the company? Something about employment solutions. The guy seemed really professional, well-dressed, and had a nice car. Not like the usual people who come around here making promises they can't keep. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. The military taught me to be cautious about opportunities that seemed too perfect. But it also taught me that you have to take calculated risks sometimes. What's your gut telling you? That I should try it. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? If it's not what he says, I just come back here, right? Sarah felt the horrible irony of the situation. Crystal was asking for advice from someone she trusted, not knowing that Sarah was part of an operation designed to rescue her from the very danger she was walking toward. When are you supposed to call? Tomorrow afternoon. He said to ask for Elena. Crystal pulled out Volkov's business card. Motor City Employment Solutions. The address is downtown, in one of those nice office buildings. Sarah memorized the information, while maintaining her supportive expression. Well, if you do decide to pursue it, maybe let someone here know where you're going. Just basic safety stuff. Yeah, good idea. You seem like someone who thinks things through. Maybe when I get settled in my new job, I could put in a good word for you, if you're interested. And there it was, the recruitment network in action. Crystal, still innocent and hopeful, was already being positioned to help identify other potential victims. Sarah smiled and thanked her, while planning how to prevent Crystal from keeping that appointment with Elena. As lights out approached, Sarah lay on her assigned bunk, surrounded by the sounds of the shelter settling into evening quiet. Snoring, whispered conversations, the occasional cry from someone experiencing nightmares. Real people living real struggles, while she maintained her fictional identity in preparation for a mission that could save lives or get them all killed. Tomorrow, she would need to position herself to be Volkov's next target. Tonight, she reviewed every detail of her cover story and prepared for the performance, that would determine whether 3 missing teenagers ever made it home alive. Saturday morning brought Sarah's opportunity. She positioned herself in the shelters, common area during Volkov's typical recruitment hours, reading a worn paperback novel while keeping peripheral awareness of the room's occupants. When Volkov arrived at 10:15 a.m., she made sure to be visible but not obviously seeking attention. He worked his way through the room methodically, engaging residents in his practiced routine of concern and opportunity. Sarah noted how he avoided certain people, older men with obvious mental health issues, women who seemed too confident or street smart, anyone whose body language suggested they might ask difficult questions. When Volkov approached her table, Sarah looked up with carefully calculated surprise, as if she hadn't noticed him coming. "Good morning," he said, his smile professionally warm. "I don't think we've met. I'm Rick Volkov from Motor City Employment Solutions. We help people find work opportunities that match their skills and circumstances." Jessica Torres. Sarah closed her book and offered a cautious smile. "I just started staying here a couple days ago. Welcome to Detroit. Are you looking for employment opportunities?" "Eventually, yeah. Still getting settled, figuring out the lay of the land." Sarah let a hint of vulnerability enter her voice. "Been out of the workforce for a while, dealing with some personal issues." Volkov settled into the chair across from her, his posture open and non-threatening. "What kind of work did you do before?" "Military for 8 years. Administrative support, logistics coordination, some security work." After that, Sarah let her voice trail off, suggesting painful memories. "Things got complicated. Medical issues, personal problems. Been trying to get back on my feet. Military experience is valuable. Employers appreciate discipline and reliability." Volkov made notes on his clipboard. "What kind of medical issues, if you don't mind me asking?" "Some employers are very understanding about veterans' challenges." Sarah pulled out one of Tommy's prescription bottles, setting it on the table between them. "Pain management that got out of hand. Combat injury led to prescription medications, which led to other problems. But I'm in recovery now. 4 months. Clean." Volkov's expression shifted subtly, not disapproval, but increased interest. Sarah recognized the predator focusing on perceived weakness. "Recovery takes tremendous courage. How are you supporting yourself during the transition?" "Unemployment. Benefits ran out last month. Some savings, but..." Sarah gestured around the shelter. "Obviously not enough for permanent housing yet. Have you considered work that includes housing assistance? Some employers provide furnished apartments as part of the compensation package, especially for employees with specialized skills." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied high-stakes deception. "That sounds too good to be true." "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just employers who understand that stable housing is essential for employee success." Volkov leaned forward slightly, his tone becoming more confidential. "The positions I'm thinking of are with companies that value discretion and professionalism. Client services, hospitality industry, executive assistants. Work that requires maturity and life experience." The euphemisms were careful, designed to plant ideas without making explicit offers that could be recorded or remembered precisely. Sarah played her role perfectly, interested but cautious, hopeful but not naive. "What kind of companies?" "Established businesses with high-end clientele. The work involves flexible scheduling, often evening and weekend hours when clients have social or business obligations. Well-compensated positions for the right candidates." Sarah let herself appear intrigued. "Sounds like exactly what I need. Flexible hours would help with my recovery program schedule." "Excellent." The next step would be a preliminary interview, usually conducted over dinner at a nice restaurant. The employers believe in treating potential employees well, showing them the kind of professional environment they'd be joining. Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering carefully. When will this interview happen? Possibly as early as next week. I'd need to submit your information to the hiring coordinator first to get approval for the interview process. Volkov handed her a business card identical to the one he'd given Crystal. Call this number Monday afternoon. Ask for Elena. She handles scheduling and can answer detailed questions about specific positions. This is really generous of you. Taking time to help people like me. Everyone deserves the opportunity to rebuild their lives. Military veterans especially. You've served your country, and your country should serve you. Volkov stood, gathering his clipboard. Jessica, this conversation stays between us for now. The employers value discretion, and there are limited positions available. After Volkov left, Sarah sat alone with his business card, processing the successful completion of her infiltration. She'd been recruited, exactly as Morrison had predicted. Now came the dangerous part: maintaining the deception while gathering intelligence about the trafficking network's operations. That afternoon, she found Crystal in the shelter courtyard, smoking a cigarette with nervous energy. I called Elena, Crystal said without preamble. The interview's scheduled for Tuesday night, dinner at some fancy place downtown. Sarah felt cold dread settling in her stomach. Tuesday was 3 days away, not enough time to safely extract Crystal without compromising the larger operation. Are you excited? Terrified, Crystal admitted. I mean, I want the job, but what if I mess it up? What if I'm not sophisticated enough for whatever they expect? You'll be fine. Just be yourself. Sarah hated the words even as she spoke them, knowing that being herself was exactly what would put Crystal in mortal danger. Rick said I might be able to recommend other people if the job works out. People with good character who deserve second chances. Crystal looked at Sarah hopefully. Maybe you could apply too? Maybe. Let's see how your interview goes first. That evening, Sarah called Morrison using the prepaid phone purchased during his supervised shopping trip. She kept the conversation brief and coded, reporting successful contact and pending interview scheduling. Package received, Morrison responded. Timeline acceptable. Maintain position until extraction order. Sunday passed slowly. Sarah attended the shelter's optional church service, participated in recreational activities, and continued building relationships with residents who might provide useful intelligence. She learned more about the shelter's routine, identified which staff members were observant and which were distracted, mapped escape routes and potential complications. Crystal spent most of Sunday preparing for her Tuesday interview, practicing conversation topics, worrying about appropriate clothing, asking other residents for advice about restaurant etiquette. Her excitement was painful to witness, the hope of someone who believed she was finally catching a break. Monday afternoon, Sarah called Elena's number from the shelter's payphone. Motor City Employment Solutions, came a professional female voice. Hi, this is Jessica Torres. Rick Volkov asked me to call about interview scheduling. Of course, Mr. Volkov mentioned you might be calling. Let me pull up your file. A pause, presumably while Elena accessed information. I have an opening Thursday evening. 7 o'clock dinner interview at Meridian Restaurant downtown. Does that work for your schedule? Yes, that's perfect. Excellent. Dress professionally, but not formally business casual. The interviewer appreciates candidates who understand appropriate presentations without being overdressed. Elena provided the restaurant address and specific instructions about arrival procedures. Asked the hostess for the Brennan party reservation. Sarah confirmed the details and hung up, her mind already racing through operational implications. Thursday gave her 3 days to gather intelligence and position herself for whatever came next. It also meant Crystal would go through her own interview process first, potentially providing valuable intelligence about the network's methods. Tuesday evening, Crystal left the shelter wearing borrowed clothes and nervous excitement. Sarah watched from the common room window as a black sedan picked her up at exactly 6 o'clock, not Volkov driving, but a professional-looking woman in her 40s. Crystal didn't return that night or Wednesday. By Thursday morning, shelter staff were making concerned inquiries, and Sarah had to maintain her cover while internally screaming about the girl's fate. "She probably just got the job and moved into company housing," suggested one resident during breakfast. "Lucky girl, getting out of this place so fast." Sarah nodded agreement while fighting the urge to contact Morrison immediately. Crystal's disappearance confirmed everything they'd suspected about the trafficking network, but it also meant Sarah was walking into the same trap with no certainty of extraction. Thursday afternoon brought final preparations. Sarah showered carefully, applied minimal makeup, dressed in the business casual outfit she'd acquired during supervised shopping trips. She reviewed her cover story one last time, checking that every detail remained consistent with her fabricated documentation. At 6:45 p.m., Sarah stood outside Meridian Restaurant in downtown Detroit. The establishment was upscale, but not ostentatious, the kind of place where business dinners happened regularly, where a woman dining with an older man wouldn't attract particular attention. Inside, the hostess directed her to a corner booth, where a man in his 50s waited with obvious military bearing. Not Volkov, but someone whose posture and alertness suggested a similar professional background. Jessica Torres? The man stood as she approached. "I'm David Brennan. Please have a seat." Sarah settled into the booth, noting that Brennan had chosen positioning that gave him clear sight lines to the restaurant entrance while keeping their conversation private. Professional tradecraft that suggested this was more than simple employment screening. "Rick Volkov speaks very highly of your background. Military logistics, security experience, someone looking for opportunities that match your skill set. I'm grateful for any chance to get back to meaningful work." Brennan signaled the waiter and ordered wine without consulting Sarah, a control technique designed to establish dominance while maintaining surface politeness. "The position we're discussing involves client services for high-end clientele. Discretion is absolutely essential. Clients value privacy and expect employees who understand appropriate boundaries." Sarah nodded, playing the role of someone eager to please. "I understand the importance of confidentiality." "Good. The work involves flexible scheduling based on client needs. Evening and weekend availability is required. Compensation includes housing, transportation, and performance bonuses that can be quite substantial." As dinner progressed, Brennan's questions became more personal, more invasive. Questions about family relationships, financial obligations, anyone who might worry if she were to travel unexpectedly. Sarah recognized the intelligence gathering determining whether she had support networks that might investigate her disappearance. "The housing arrangement," Sarah said during dessert. "Is that in Detroit, or would I need to relocate?" "Initially local, but the position involves travel opportunities. Some clients prefer to conduct business in other cities, even internationally. Employees who demonstrate reliability and professionalism often advance to more lucrative assignments." Sarah felt the trap closing around her. Travel assignments meant complete isolation from any potential rescue. Transportation to locations where victims could be controlled absolutely. "When would I start?" "Immediately, if you're selected." "Tonight, actually. We believe in transitioning new employees quickly into stable housing situations." Brennan smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Your belongings from the shelter can be collected later. We provide everything you need initially." Sarah realized with crystal clarity that she wouldn't be returning to the safe haven shelter tonight. Whatever happened next would determine whether Morrison's extraction plan succeeded, or whether she joined Crystal and the 3 missing teenagers in whatever hell the trafficking network had created. "That sounds perfect," she said, maintaining her grateful expression while calculating distances to exits, identifying potential weapons, Preparing for the fight that was coming, Brennan paid the check and guided her toward the restaurant entrance. Outside, the same black sedan that had collected Crystal waited at the curb. Engine running, tinted windows concealing whoever was inside. As Sarah approached the vehicle, her hand moved instinctively toward the concealed knife Morrison had provided. For emergency situations, 3 days of careful infiltration were about to be tested in whatever happened next. The rear door opened, revealing 2 men with the unmistakable bearing of professional muscle. Sarah stepped toward the car, every sense alert, every muscle ready for action. Behind her, Brennan spoke quietly into his phone. Package confirmed. Proceeding to the secondary location. Sarah climbed into the sedan, surrounded by predators who had destroyed countless young lives. But she carried with her the training, skills, and determination of a Marine Force reconnaissance operator who had never failed a mission. The war for Detroit's most vulnerable residents was about to enter its final phase. The sedan moved through Detroit's darkening streets with practiced efficiency, taking routes that avoided main thoroughfares and traffic cameras. Sarah memorized every turn while maintaining her nervous but compliant demeanor. The 2 men flanking her remained silent, their attention split between watching her and monitoring radio communications through discreet earpieces. Brennan sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally giving directions to the driver in codes that suggested military or law enforcement background. Sarah recognized the operational security, no street names spoken aloud, no destinations mentioned that could be overheard or recorded. After 20 minutes of serpentine driving, they pulled into an industrial complex near the river. Abandoned auto plants and empty warehouses stretched in every direction, the kind of desolate landscape where screens wouldn't carry and bodies could disappear without investigation. The sedan stopped beside a renovated warehouse that looked operational. From the outside, subtle lighting, well-maintained exterior, vehicles parked in an organized pattern that suggested ongoing business activity. But Sarah noticed details that civilian eyes would miss. Strategic positioning of security cameras, reinforced door frames, window placements designed for surveillance rather than natural light. "Welcome to your new workplace," Brennan said as they exited the vehicle. "Orientation begins immediately." Inside, the warehouse had been converted into a sophisticated operations center. Multiple levels connected by metal stairs, office spaces with computer workstations, living quarters that looked more like prison cells with electronic locks. The organization was impressive and terrifying, a fully functional facility designed to process human beings like industrial commodities. Sarah counted at least 15 people moving through the space with purpose and familiarity. Some were clearly security personnel, others appeared to be administrative staff, and a few wore the expensive clothing of management. This wasn't a temporary operation, it was an established business with infrastructure, hierarchy, and systematic procedures. Impressive, isn't it? Brennan guided her toward an elevator that would take them to the upper levels. Most people imagine trafficking as desperate criminals operating from back alleys. The reality is far more professional. They passed a series of rooms with reinforced doors and small windows. Through one, Sarah glimpsed Crystal sitting on a narrow bed, wearing different clothes and staring at nothing with the hollow expression of someone processing trauma. The girl was alive but clearly no longer the hopeful teenager who had left the shelter 3 days earlier. Other windows revealed more young women in similar states, some crying, some sleeping, some sitting in the vacant silence that followed. Psychological breaking. Sarah counted 12 visible victims, all appearing to be between 15 and 25 years old. The orientation process typically takes 72 hours. Brennan explained as they reached the administrative level. Physical examination, psychological evaluation, training in client service expectations. Most new employees adjust to their circumstances within a week. Sarah felt rage building in her chest, but forced herself to maintain the submissive posture expected of a trafficking victim. Every instinct screamed for immediate action, but she needed more intelligence before making her move. They entered an office where a woman in professional attire was reviewing files on multiple computer screens. Medical records, psychological profiles, client preferences, the systematic cataloging of human beings reduced to marketable characteristics. "This is Dr. Patricia Vance," Brennan said. "She handles new employee processing." "Patricia, this is Jessica Torres, our latest recruitment." Dr. Vance looked up with clinical interest. "Military background, recovery from substance abuse, no significant. Family connections. Excellent profile for our specialized clientele." Sarah realized with growing horror that her fabricated backstory had made her attractive not just as a trafficking victim, but as someone who could have disappeared completely without investigation. The combination of military training and personal isolation made her valuable merchandise for clients with specific fantasies about controlling strong women. "The medical examination will confirm your health status and establish baseline documentation," Dr. Vance continued. "Following that, we'll discuss your new employment contract and living arrangements." Sarah was escorted to a medical facility that belonged in a legitimate hospital professional equipment. Sterile conditions, examination rooms designed for thorough physical evaluation. But the security cameras and reinforced walls revealed the true purpose of the medical screening. As Dr. Vance prepared examination equipment, Sarah noticed a computer workstation displaying client profiles and appointment schedules. Wealthy men from across the country, paying enormous sums for access to specific types of victims. Military veterans, college students, runaways, each category marketed to particular psychological preferences. The examination proceeded with clinical efficiency. Blood work, physical measurements, psychological questioning designed to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited for control. Dr. Vance documented everything with the thoroughness of someone preparing merchandise for sale. "Your physical conditioning is excellent," Dr. Vance noted. "Some clients specifically request partners who can provide resistance. Your military background suggests you could be quite popular in that market segment." Sarah understood the implication with sickening clarity. She wasn't just being trafficked. She was being prepared for clients who derived pleasure from violence, from breaking strong women through systematic abuse. During the psychological evaluation, Sarah provided carefully crafted responses that reinforced her cover story. While gathering intelligence about the operation's scope, Dr. Vance revealed details about client locations, transportation methods, and the financial infrastructure that supported the trafficking network. "Tomorrow you'll begin specialized training," Dr. Vance concluded. "Learning client service protocols, appropriate responses to different requests, consequences for non-compliance. Most employees find the adjustment easier if they embrace their new circumstances quickly." As evening approached, Sarah was assigned to a cell on the residential level. The space was clean but Spartan: bed, small bathroom, security camera, electronic lock controlled from a central monitoring station. Through her window, she could see the Detroit skyline in the distance, the normal world continuing its routine while horror unfolded in this industrial wasteland. Morrison would be expecting some form of communication by now. The original extraction plan had assumed she would maintain shelter residence for several more days before recruitment. Her early abduction meant improvisation, both hers and his. Sarah examined her cell methodically, identifying structural weaknesses, noting the camera's blind spots, testing the electronic lock's response patterns. The facility was sophisticated, but not impregnable. Every security system had vulnerabilities if you understood the technology and possessed the right skills. Her concealed knife remained undetected, hidden in a location that had survived the medical examination. Other potential weapons existed throughout the facility: medical equipment, construction tools, office supplies that could become lethal in trained hands. As midnight approached, Sarah heard footsteps in the corridor outside her cell. Heavy boots. Multiple people, the sound of electronic locks disengaging. Something was happening, either routine security checks or the beginning of whatever came next in the trafficking process. She positioned herself near the door, ready to react to whatever was coming. The footsteps stopped outside her cell, followed by the distinctive sound of her electronic lock cycling open. Sarah Mitchell, former Marine Force reconnaissance operator, prepared to discover whether 3 months of careful planning would save the lives of 15 trafficking victims, or whether she would join them in whatever hell these predators had created. The cell door opened, revealing armed men whose expressions suggested that orientation was about to become something far more dangerous than psychological evaluation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.